I've been transmigrated as the vicious ex-girlfriend in a CEO romance novel. At the height of the male lead's career, I was supposed to seduce him, swindling him out of cars and houses. Then, when he's framed and goes bankrupt, I'm meant to pack my bags and leave, making way for the female lead to enter the scene. But now, due to a system glitch, my entry timing is all wrong. By the time I first meet the male lead, his company has already gone bust. He's left with only $600 to his name, clutching a cardboard box on the rooftop. Yet the system's instructions remain unchanged. Quick! Go seduce him! Get a Hermès bag within a week, a Maserati in a month, and trick him into buying a mansion in 3 months. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. What did you say? You want me to deceive him, seduce him, and then squeeze money out of this man who looks like a pauper? I pointed at the bewildered-looking man in front of me, desperately arguing with the system. I was almost going mad. Damon Howard stood at the edge of the rooftop, wearing a thin white shirt. He looked unsteady, as if he might fall at any moment. Where was that arrogant, dignified CEO now? The system remained silent. After a few seconds, it finally admitted reluctantly. I'm sorry, host. As a novice AI just starting this job, there was a small oversight. I made a mistake with the timeline you were placed in. According to the original settings, you should have traveled here 2 years ago. It coughed twice, pretending to be calm. But it doesn't matter. Although the timeline is wrong, our task as the evil supporting female character remains the same. That is to drain him of his money, then cruelly abandon him. Damon Howard now has only $600 left. Yet the system is asking me to extract a Hermès handbag from him within a week. It can't handle it anymore and is begging me, whimpering. Making such a big mistake on my first job, the boss will surely scold me to death. Host, please help me, cover it up for me. After this is over, I'll definitely repay you. I'll report to my superiors and apply for double points for you. Please, I'm begging you. If I had traveled back in time 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been too surprised by the difficulty of this task. In the original plot. At that time, it was just when the male lead's company had gone public and everything was looking up. As a new tech tycoon, he was the talk of the entire business circle. Let alone a Hermès bag, he could casually buy luxury cars and villas. Many old money families wanted to marry their daughters to him. To achieve a business alliance, a powerful combination. But almost no one knew that Damon Howard's grandfather had once been a young intellectual sent to the countryside, where he had an accident and was saved by a rural youth surnamed Finch. The two not only became good brothers, they also agreed that if they had children or grandchildren in the future, they could become in-laws, adding kinship to friendship. But later, the Howard family was called back to the city, and the contact between the two families gradually broke off. The childhood betrothal was also gradually forgotten. Until I, a gold-digging supporting character with malicious and deep thoughts, happened to hear this story somewhere. Then came all the way from out of town, shamelessly impersonating the granddaughter of that Mr. Finch, Ruby Finch, telling lies to occupy a place by Damon Howard's side. Cheating for food, drinks, money, and intimacy. Ordering him to date me, to get engaged to me. Then waiting until he was framed and went bankrupt. Immediately running away with the money without hesitation, leaving him alone. Even if he wanted to take his own life, I didn't care at all. Never looking back again. The real Ruby Finch was supposed to be the female lead of the novel. In the original story, after her grandfather passed away, she learned about this childhood betrothal from his will. She then boarded a train, traveling tirelessly. Finally, she found the company of the male lead. And then she saw Damon Howard standing on the edge of the rooftop, teetering on the brink, about to jump off. As the redemptive female lead of the story, the real Ruby Finch, of course, wouldn't heartlessly turn and walk away like I would as the vicious female antagonist. She was gentle, caring, and kind. At the male lead's most difficult and helpless moment, she saved Damon Howard from taking his own life. She accompanied him, healed him. Together, they rebuilt his fortune, reaching the final happily ever after ending. But now, where is the female lead? Where is the touching redemption? Why the bloody hell has it been replaced by me, the vicious female antagonist? The system coughed twice. Sorry, host. Due to a system malfunction, the female lead's arrival time has also been delayed. She will meet the male lead 2 years later, so during this time, could we trouble you to follow the original script and deceive the male lead a little? I swear I could kill this bloody system. But before I could even open my mouth, Damon took a step towards the edge of the roof right in front of my eyes. His right hand caressed the necklace his mother had left him. He looked as if he might topple over at any moment. If the male lead died, the entire storyline would collapse beyond repair. It was about to explode. I had no time to think. In the next instant, I summoned every ounce of sprinting power I'd ever possessed in my life. I dashed forward and wrapped my arms around Damon's waist. Then I used all my strength to pull him away from the railing. Caught up in his emotions, the male lead was completely unprepared. He fell backwards, and we both tumbled to the ground. He stared at me in bewilderment, this person who had appeared out of nowhere. After a long moment, he seemed to slowly realize what had happened. He shook his head and gave a bitter smile. Thank you for saving me. But I really don't want to live anymore. Life is too painful. We're just strangers passing by. Once you leave, I cut him off. You still want to die? If it were the real Ruby Finch, she would surely comfort him gently and thoughtfully. She would warm Damon's heart that had sunk to the depths. But I'm not her. I can't steal the female lead script. Instinctively, I flipped over and sat on the male lead's body, slapping him across the face. How dare you die? Do you know who I am? I'm the one who's supposed to marry you. Get up right now. You haven't even paid the dowry yet, how dare you try to die? Damon Howard was clearly dumbfounded. Understandably so. Suddenly, a person falls from the sky, claiming to be the one he's supposed to marry. Who wouldn't be confused? Despite being a CEO for so many years, his temperament was surprisingly good. Gentle and refined. Even after I slapped him, he didn't get angry, just shook his head. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. The next moment, I slapped his left cheek as well. Rubbish, how could I mistake you for someone else? You're Damon Howard. Your father is Stanley Howard. Your grandfather Arthur Howard and my grandfather Albert Finch are sworn brothers. They arranged our marriage in Finch Village. I took a breath and continued my tirade. Everyone in our village says your Howard family has made it big. You now run a company in the big city, live in a mansion, and are a CEO. You can't go back on your word and deny this engagement. After all, I'm going to be the CEO's wife in the future. Damon rubbed his reddening cheeks. He pondered for a moment, then stood up. Looking at me, he finally seemed to remember. Ruby Finch, is that right? My grandfather did mention this matter. But the Howard family has fallen, and I'm not the Damon Howard I used to be. I can't give you the life you want. Our engagement should be. He wanted to say cancelled. But I absolutely couldn't let him utter those words. Who knows if the engagement was truly cancelled? He might turn around when I'm not paying attention and jump off the roof. I leaned forward and grabbed his collar. Fiercely, aggressively, through gritted teeth. Dutifully reenacting the actions of a vicious supporting character. I shouted hysterically. What do you mean? You want to abandon me? You heartless scoundrel. Everyone in Finch Village knows I'm coming to the city to marry into a wealthy family. If you break off the engagement now, how can I ever show my face again? I might as well die. Saying this, I even started to feel emotional myself. I shoved Damon aside and rushed towards the edge of the roof. All the while shouting. It's so embarrassing, I'll never find anyone else. Everyone come and see what a scumbag he is. I don't want to live anymore. Don't stop me. Damon had never seen anything like this before. He was stunned for just a brief moment. The next instant, his body reacted instinctively before his mind could process. He rushed over, wrapped his arms around my waist, pulled me down firmly and forcefully, his voice trembling. Don't do anything stupid. I'll marry you, just don't kill yourself. Oh, you sweet man, you lose out by being too kind, too gentle. Even though you yourself no longer want to live, you still can't bear to watch someone else's misfortune unfold before your eyes. I tugged at the corners of my mouth, secretly flashing a smug smile. Slowly, I let him pull me down. Snuggling up against him intimately, I casually draped my arm around Damon's, acting overly familiar, nonchalantly guiding him towards the stairs leading away from the rooftop. It's good that you've come to your senses. Let me tell you, I'm the village beauty. I've got no shortage of suitors. You won't regret being with me. Besides, I won't bleed you dry with the bride price. Just $300,000, that's all. Damon suddenly looked up, frowning as he stared directly at me. I told you I don't have money right now. I waved my hand, cutting off his words. If you don't have it now, you can owe me. But there's no way I'm waiving it. I pressed up against him, clinging to his neck. Squeezing my voice, I shamelessly cooed, "Darling. You wouldn't want people to mock me for not having a proper bride price, would you? I'm so emotionally fragile. If you don't treat me well, I might just jump off a building, you know." He fell silent. More accurately, after experiencing bankruptcy and attempted suicide. He was emotionally exhausted and had no energy left to argue with me. This former CEO had zero assets due to bankruptcy liquidation. He was left with only $600 in cash in his pocket. Homeless, without even a place to stay. With no other choice, he had to come back with me to where I lived. A rented flat not far from here. Just 3 bus stops away. The system had very efficiently arranged it for me just half an hour ago. Although Damon was now bankrupt, in his white shirt and tall stature, he still seemed out of place in this 40-square-meter apartment in the small alley. He concealed his emotions, not revealing any expression. He just tightly hugged the box his mother had left him and softly said, "Thank you." His face was truly handsome. I looked at him for a while longer. After a moment, I gently tugged at his tie. With a slight smile, I said, "No need to be so polite with me. You're my future husband, after all. After all, I'm not the kind-hearted female lead. Staying by my side, the villainous supporting character, you'll have plenty more to endure in the future." Damon Howard truly wanted to die. His parents had passed away a few years ago, and the rest of his family saw him as a plague to be avoided at all costs. The company employees had already been given substantial severance pay. There wasn't much left to take care of. He had no attachments. That once burning ambition for career and fame had been worn away, ground to dust by the betrayal of friends and business partners. In the cramped living room of his rented flat, he curled up alone on that well-worn sofa. Draped over him was the first bespoke suit his father had given him the year his startup succeeded. Due to its unique sentimental value, he could never bring himself to sell it. It was even what he chose to wear when going to his death. Night had fallen. But no matter how he tried to force himself, he still couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, all he saw were visions of the day his company went bankrupt. Stocks plummeting wildly. Frantic phone calls from investors. The panicked faces of his subordinates. Everything seemed frozen in time on that chaotic day. And his life had inevitably become synonymous with the word failure. Damon sat up. He covered his face, remaining seated until the first ray of sunlight peeked through the curtains. He thought. He still had to die. Holding his mother's keepsakes, wearing his father's clothes to die. A failure had no right to go on living. He had no way to fulfill the marriage agreement with the Finch family either. But Ruby Finch was still young, anything would be better than being saddled with a useless man like him for life. He could find some paper, write a suicide note. Explain everything clearly. Say it wasn't that the Howards looked down on the Finch girl, but that the Howards had gone bankrupt and were no longer worthy of the marriage arrangement. Having made up his mind, Damon closed his eyes and leaned back on the sofa, taking a deep breath. This was it. He picked up a pen from the table and had just written the first line. When suddenly, smack! At the edge of his vision, that Finch girl had rushed over and slapped him across the face. "Do you know what time it is?" Why aren't you up sending out CVs and looking for work? Do you expect to freeload off me forever? On my first day living with the male lead, I didn't sleep well either. Usually, I'm the type to sleep until noon. Now I was tossing and turning in bed and woke up just after 6. There were faint sounds coming from the living room, like sighs or soft crying. I quietly got out of bed, tiptoed to the door, and peeked out from the doorframe. Damon was sitting on the sofa, his face in his hands. He seemed lost in some kind of reminiscence about the past. After a while, he suddenly sat up straight. He took a pen from the table and began to write something. The system wasn't asleep either, and commented in my ear. "What's this guy doing up in the middle of the night? He's not writing some revenge plan, is he? No way. Definitely not. If he still had that kind of drive and ambition for the future, he wouldn't be having thoughts of death." A thought suddenly popped into my head. It's not a suicide note, is it? The next moment, I pushed open the door and rushed over. I slapped Damon's face with a loud smack. "Do you know what time it is? Why aren't you up sending out CVs and looking for a job? Do you expect to freeload off me?" Damon was good-natured. But even the most gentle and tolerant person couldn't remain passive and endure being slapped several times for no reason. He suddenly stood up, crumpling the suicide note he had intended to write into a ball and throwing it into the nearby bin. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed. "Will you ever stop?" he snapped, glaring at me with eyes that sparkled with annoyance. Seeing him angry like this actually put me at ease. I wasn't afraid of his anger. I was afraid of him being lifeless. When someone is idle and lacks vitality, curled up in one place, it's easy for their mind to wander. Especially for someone like Damon, who had no attachments, suicidal thoughts could naturally emerge. I coughed twice. Grabbing his arm, I pulled him down to sit beside me and raised my voice slightly, feigning hurt. "Why are you shouting? Can't I give you a couple of slaps? You don't even have basic gentle as a man. You should reflect on that. Besides," I continued, "even though we haven't got our marriage certificate yet, you're practically a married man now. As a man, a future husband and father, you need to have a sense of responsibility. Do you expect to live off me forever? You can't pay the bride price. Can you at least pay for your own meals?" His face turned from red to white as I spoke. "Even the system admired me. You even brought up family. How could he possibly have the nerve to die now? Ah, well. I'm the evil supporting character after all." I found a laptop in the cupboard. I turned it on and connected to the Wi-Fi. "I don't have high expectations for you," I said. "Look at your qualifications and work experience. You could easily land a job paying several $1,000s a month. Quickly send me your CV and I'll blast it out to all the job sites." This time Damon didn't resist. He obediently accepted my friend request on WhatsApp. Then he sent over a CV. It must have been from a few years ago, when he first started his business. I barely glanced at it before being dazzled by the impressive contents. Top secondary school, elite university graduate. Supervised by a fellow of the Royal Society, published papers in top journals. Most importantly, he had been involved in several startup projects, almost all of which had received substantial funding and yielded considerable returns. With credentials like these, what job couldn't he get? I immediately mass submitted to hundreds of company inboxes across various job search apps with just a few clicks. Damon seemed to notice my expression. He tugged slightly at the corner of his mouth, self-deprecatingly saying, "That's all in the past. The way I am now. I doubt any respectable company would want me." "Nonsense." I interrupted him. "I won't let you belittle yourself like that. If Damon couldn't get a job offer, I might as well just give up and do nothing." As if to validate what I had just said, my phone started buzzing incessantly. Several companies began messaging me through the app's backend. "Hello, are you looking for a job? Is your CV genuine? Are you really Mr. Howard? If possible, we'd like to schedule an interview with you." Not only were the HR representatives polite, but they were all from well-known, reputable companies I had heard of. Excited, I immediately downloaded all the recruitment information from those companies. I bundled them up and forwarded everything to Damon. Then I happily grabbed his arm. Wow, darling future husband, see? I told you many places would appreciate your skills. Their salaries all look quite good too. Quick, go for interviews, get to work, and start earning money. Then give all your earnings to me. I saw a lovely handbag in a magazine the other day. It's the latest model and so pretty. Probably annoyed by my chatter, Damon stood up, looking a bit weary. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed. All right, I get it. I'll go out now and see about some interviews, but don't get your hopes up. I cut him off. Looking up at Damon, I asked, do you want me to come with you? He declined my offer. No need. Although Damon said I didn't need to go with him and his mother's belongings were still in the rented flat. As someone chosen by the system to be a working-class hero, I decided to quietly follow him to prevent any dark thoughts of self-harm from creeping in when I wasn't looking. Fortunately, this time the journey seemed to go smoothly without any hiccups. Damon's mood remained quite stable. He unlocked a shared bicycle and rode for about 15 minutes before finally stopping outside a nearby office building. I got out of the taxi and took out my phone to have a look. This was one of the companies that had messaged me on the job recruitment app, but not the largest or most well-known one there. Was Damon choosing this for his first interview to boost his chances of success and lift his spirits in the job search? In my line of sight, Damon had already entered the company building. With nothing else to do, I bought a bubble tea and sat on a flower bed, sipping the pearls while logging on to play a mobile game to pass the time aimlessly. I had originally prepared to wait for an hour, then secretly hide and follow him to the next interview location. However, unexpectedly, after just 20 minutes, I had just lost a ranked match when suddenly the system's shrill voice rang in my ear. Host! Host, quick, look! The male lead seems to have been kicked out. No way, right? I hurriedly stood up and ducked behind a large tree nearby. It was just a job interview. Did he clash with the boss's values or have conflicting ideals? How could he get kicked out? It was indeed like that. Damon was practically pushed out by the security guards inside. He looked somewhat disheveled at this moment, stumbling a few steps before barely steadying himself. Behind him, several people in security uniforms were cursing and swearing, though I couldn't make out what they were saying from this distance. The system was also surprised. What's going on? Host, do you want to go check it out? I think the male lead's emotions are a bit unstable. Damon lowered his head. His expression was unclear, but he was still clutching a printed resume in his hand. Should I go to him? I shook my head. Damon's past had been smooth sailing, worthy of being called heaven's favored child. The setbacks and hardships of these past few days were something he had never experienced before. If I were to appear now, it would undoubtedly expose the lowest and most embarrassing part of his life. For him, it would probably be even more cruel. I took out my phone. After some thought, I still sent him a voice message. Darling, how did the interview go? Remember to let me know when you have the results. I'll be waiting for you at home. At the edge of my vision, Damon also took out his phone. He glanced at it and quickly replied to my message. Got it. Also, I've been meaning to say, we're not at the stage of calling each other darling yet. Damon stood there for a while. He straightened his clothes and then walked towards another building nearby. It was also one of the companies I had sent him, one that had reached out through the recruitment app. They were all conveniently located in this tech park area, saving the hassle of taking a cab or moving around too much. This time, I didn't wait outside. I was too curious about what was happening inside. So I quietly followed him, getting the system to make me a temporary visitor's access card. Then I snuck to the outside of the interview reception room. Sitting on a small stool in the corridor, I pricked up my ears attentively. I was in luck. This interview didn't seem to have invited anyone else. And there weren't even any extra staff arranged outside the room. I brazenly pressed my ear against the door crack. The next moment, voices came through. Damon, I didn't think you'd actually come. Have you forgotten about that good friend of yours? He's emailed all the companies, telling us not to help you if you're really looking for a job. I'm sorry. If HR had told me earlier that you were coming, I wouldn't have let you make this trip. There was a pause. The person who seemed to be the company boss added another sentence. He's probably contacted everyone, so don't bother going to the other places either. Some might even take this opportunity to humiliate you. I was stunned on the spot. What? Who was this friend of Damon they were talking about? Fortunately, Damon didn't come out that quickly. He chatted with the people inside for a while longer, and as I listened outside, I gradually pieced things together. It turned out Damon's bankruptcy wasn't as simple as imagined. He had been betrayed from within. Damon had always treated the traitor like an elder brother figure. His parents had passed away one after another. It was also this person who encouraged him to move past the grief and try starting a business. So when Damon later became successful in his career, when the other person came to ask him for internal company data, he had no suspicions whatsoever. Then the other person turned around and sold it to his competitors. They ganged up to force him into bankruptcy. Then casually said to him, "Sorry, but what's friendship worth in the face of money and profits?" Damon. Don't blame me, I've been good to you as a brother in the past. I finally understood why Damon was so fixated on dying. He seemed to have truly lost all hope and attachment to this world. If it was just the company going bankrupt, it might not have come to this. For an entrepreneur, he could still try to make a comeback and start over. But what if there was more? Parents passing away, family abandonment, best friends' betrayal. Everything was like a sandcastle, washed away in an instant by water. Everyone left him. No matter how hard he tried, family, friends, career, he couldn't hold on to anything. Could one still persevere even then? I quietly slipped away before Damon Howard came out. After swiping my visitor's badge to exit the building, I initially thought about going home. But then I changed my mind. A new dessert shop had opened nearby, offering discounts to attract customers. For just $50, you could get a decent-looking 6-inch chocolate cake. I went in and bought one. As I came out, Damon was just walking out of the building. This time, there were no security guards barking orders at him. He looked much better than last time. He adjusted his clothes. His expression was neutral. He lifted his head. And our eyes met. I was holding the little box, skipping towards him, calling out and reaching out with both hands. "Darling! What a coincidence! I came out to buy lunch and ran into you." My tone was cheerful. I completely disregarded the fact that just 2 hours ago, Damon had formally told me via text that we weren't ready for such intimate terms of endearment yet. I quickly wrapped my arm around his. This must be fate, right? Did you just have an interview? How did it go? Any results? Clearly, Damon's body stiffened for a moment. He was silent for a few seconds, not saying a word. It seemed like he was trying to restrain himself, to hold back. Then, as if he could no longer contain it, he suddenly erupted. Raising his voice, he turned to look at me, his eyes slightly bloodshot. "Yes, the results are out. Failure, complete failure. No company wants rubbish like me. Nobody in this world wants me, okay? I'm just that useless. I told you before, that engagement should be called off. You're wasting your time on a worthless person like me, you're only holding yourself back." He subtly tried to pull his arm away from me, taking 2 steps back, as if wanting to keep his distance. He lowered his head slightly, turning his face to the side. It seemed like he was bracing himself defensively, afraid I might slap him again. Fair enough. After all, my character as the vicious female antagonist was supposed to be irritable, overbearing, utterly lacking in empathy, and unreasonably difficult. In the 2 days since meeting Damon Howard, I had already slapped him several times, one after another. He closed his eyes, wearing an expression of resignation. But unexpectedly, what landed on his cheek this time wasn't a slap. It was a soft sigh. I hugged him tightly. Standing on tiptoes, I gently patted Damon's head. "Who says nobody wants you? You still have me, Don't you? I'll always, be by your side. Once the female lead arrives, I'll have to leave Damon sooner or later. But I think to myself, his mental state has already deteriorated to this point. If I tell a small, well-intentioned lie, it should be harmless, right? Damon seemed stunned by my actions. He remained silent for quite a while before slowly straightening up and staring at me intently. Word by word, he asked, "You won't leave me?" He paused. "But Ruby," he continued, "look closely. I'm not only no longer a CEO, but I can't even find a job. I'm not as capable as you thought." Another pause. "You might even have to support me." I yawned and waved the newly bought cupcake. I know, I said. "If you can't find a job, then don't look for now. I told you we could delay the bride price, didn't I? I'm in no rush to get married." I took his hand. "Let's go home and eat these cupcakes," I suggested. I tried one, and it's delicious. From now on, whenever something good happens, we'll buy these to celebrate. How does that sound? The next moment, Damon slowly grasped my hand in return. He softly replied, "All right." As expected, Damon stopped looking for work for a while. After failing the interview, he started staying in his rented flat. Of course, he wasn't doing nothing. He took over tasks like tidying the room and cooking. But most of the time, he was curled up alone on the sofa with his phone, fiddling with who knows what. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days passed. I wasn't worried yet. But the system was getting anxious. It started urging me. "Host, do you think the male lead has really given up? How can you be so calm? Remember the task, host. If he really becomes a penniless bum for life, how are we going to squeeze money out of him? This is straying from our original mission." I was really getting fed up with the system's nagging. I scratched my ear and coughed twice. Because, although I could force him to improve himself, slap by slap, in the end, whether to give up or persevere, that's always his own decision. It's just like students preparing for exams. Parents and teachers can urge you once, twice, 3 times. But the self-motivation of top students always comes from within. And Damon, I believe in him. I believe he can figure it out on his own. 5 days later, Damon was finally ready to go out. I was playing video games in the bedroom at the time. A glance from the corner of my eye. I caught him standing at the doorway, his eyelashes lifting slightly as he looked at me. This time he was wearing the suit his father had left him, dressed neat and tidy. He held a stack of documents in his hand. They looked as if they had been flipped through many times, with the edges slightly curled. He called my name softly. "Ruby." I gave a brief "oh," not looking up until I finished the game round. Then I raised my head, pretending to be startled by his appearance today, my pupils contracting as I exclaimed, "Wow, hubby! What's going on? Why are you dressed like this? Are you running away from home?" Damon pressed his lips together. He shook his head slightly at first. Then after a moment of silence, as if making up his mind, he took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, Ruby," he said. "You're right, I can't let myself go on like this anymore. I still have you, I can't burden you for a lifetime, becoming useless and making you take care of me all the time." He looked down at those documents and said slowly, "I'm going to try to start a business again. Make new plans, raise investments, start over bit by bit. Ruby, trust me. I won't let you down." I put down my phone and got off the bed. Standing on tiptoes, I hugged him. "All right," I said. "I believe in you." Damon didn't disappoint me. Nor did he disappoint himself. In 2 years, he truly managed to rise from the ashes, once again fighting his way back to the center of the business world. He became, once more, a figure hotly discussed by people. Perhaps the protagonist's halo played a small part in this. But more importantly, it was Damon himself. I've never seen someone so energetic and tireless. He slept only 4 or 5 hours a day. He visited investors one by one, repeatedly striving for funding and projects. He had no shortage of competitors. But some were moved by his sincerity and were willing to give him a chance. With not particularly abundant funds, he gradually won back his former company building, bit by bit. Damon, having climbed up from rock bottom, became less gloomy. Our relationship also seemed to grow more intimate. He became very clingy. He would definitely come home for lunch and dinner every day, taking over the cooking and cleaning chores. I don't know from whom he learned this obsessive cleanliness that made him reluctant to hire help. At first, when the company was just established, it needed a lot of money, and most of the funds were invested in development. Later, as the business gradually got on track and stabilized, Damon finally became wealthy. He returned to the life of a CEO. Without my reminding him, he would proactively bring home the latest luxury handbags and jewelry for me to choose from. He also bought 2 luxury cars and a villa, all under my name. I kept the bank card. His income was directly deposited into this card, leaving himself just a few thousand of pocket money each month. In 2 years, we had saved up nearly $3 million. Then, on a day that didn't seem particularly special, he came home from work, held my hand as we went for a walk. Suddenly, he took out a red velvet ring box from his pocket. Looking at me, he said, very seriously, word by word, "Darling, I'm giving you all the money in my bank account as a dowry. Can we get married now?" Damon now seems quite accustomed to calling me his wife. $30 million. Compared to the $300,000 dowry I mentioned years ago, it's increased 100-fold. But, can I really agree to this? My head exploded with a bang. I was utterly shocked. What should I do? All that talk about dowry, handbags, luxury goods. I've indeed been feeding him these ideas daily, but now that it's come to this, what excuse can I use to refuse? I can't just say it was all a lie before, so we're not getting married, can I? The next moment, the system's voice suddenly rang in my ear. "Host! Get ready, the female lead is coming back. Ruby Finch. The real Ruby Finch." What? My fingers had already started to reach out, as I couldn't think of an excuse. But because of that one sentence, I froze in place. Slowly, ever so slowly, I pulled my hand back. The real Ruby Finch, huh? I have to admit, Damon has been too good to me. Always calling me darling and Ruby so affectionately. For a while, I almost forgot about the female lead. I even thought I was the real granddaughter of the Finch family. Now that I think about it, it's time to return him to the rightful person. The system coughed twice, its tone somewhat apologetic. "Sorry, host, for telling you this news in such a situation. The female lead is actually a character from this world. Due to a system bug, the real Ruby Finch only found out about the arranged marriage between the Finch and Howard families a week ago. She bought a train ticket yesterday and has just arrived in the city, heading towards Howard Tower." After a pause, the system continued, addressing me. "As for you, host, you have completed all your tasks. As agreed, all the points will be returned to your account." It sighed, "You can leave any time you want." I raised my eyes to look at Damon standing opposite me. During this minute or so of silence between us, he was still clutching the ring tightly in his hand. But as time passed, his expression gradually became more nervous and uneasy. His lips were slightly pursed. Seeming to exert some effort, Damon forced a smile that looked somewhat strained. He seemed to have noticed something was off with me. Taking a deep breath, he said softly, "Ruby, what's wrong? Is this style not to your liking? Do you want me to buy another one?" I tried hard to hold back the sadness of parting. I looked at him intensely, etching his image in my heart. Then I walked up to him and gave him one last hug. "No need, I love it. Remember that little cupcake I bought when you first started job hunting? Wait here for me, I'll go buy one and we'll celebrate tonight. My part ends here. As for how the male and female leads develop afterwards, it's no longer any of my concern. Nor do I need to know." The system indeed kept its promise, doubling the original task points and converting them to currency, depositing it into my account. Along with the things Damon had given me before. Cash, handbags, and a car. I can now truly be considered a wealthy woman. Since this wealth can only be spent in this world, I chose to stay here. I asked the system to help me obtain new identity documents using my original name, Nina Bell. That very night, I boarded a plane, leaving that city behind, heading south. As a wealthy woman, I quickly began living an enviable life. Morning tea, shopping, getting my nails done, attending fashion launch events. Then every day, looking at the enormous sum in my bank account that I couldn't even count, sighing at the empty and boring life. 2 years after leaving Damon Howard, one day, having lived this luxurious yet dull life for too long, on a whim, I made a decision that went against my ancestors. I decided to use that money to invest in a startup. The idea popped into my head while I was having afternoon tea with my friends. Their spoons clattered onto the table. One by one, they gaped at me, jaws practically on the floor. Good heavens, have you gone mad? Rich kids like us should just sit back and enjoy life. We mustn't go stirring up trouble. Exactly. You know the Sterling family's eldest son, right? Top university, first in his class. My dad praised him to high heaven for years. How brilliant he was. Then after graduation, he started a business and lost over $100 million in 2 years. We couldn't blow that much cash even if we bought loads of boy toys. Well, they had a point. But how should I put this? I thought to myself, those years I spent with Damon may have spoiled me rotten. Not only did I have everything handed to me on a silver platter, but whenever I was in a foul mood, he'd come over with those puppy dog eyes and ask, "Ruby, are you unhappy? Why don't you hit me? You used to like doing that, didn't you?" I have to admit, I really miss those times. So much so that even after leaving Damon, I tried hiring a couple of uni students. Gave them a hefty sum to let me slap them around when I was in a bad mood. But they just glared at me defiantly. You may have bought my time, but I still have my dignity. I'll sleep with you, but you can't humiliate me like this. Good grief. If I wanted to sleep with you lot, I'd be the one getting the short end of the stick. Later I realized there's one type of person with absolutely no dignity. The working class. As long as you pay them enough, you can boss them around and berate them however you like. So I decided, I might as well become a boss myself. To everyone's surprise, I seemed to be quite successful as a boss. Not only did I avoid losses, but I even started making a profit. At the dessert shop, my friends' jaws dropped to the table once again. This time, they had also invited the university graduate they mentioned last time, and they all demanded that I start teaching classes. You're absolutely the role model and exemplar of a strong, independent woman for us. My dad says we should hang out with high achievers like you. That's how you improve yourself. Please, please teach me. If the company keeps losing money, my parents will disown me. A barrage of flattery. It made me feel quite pleased with myself. Actually, it's not that mysterious. I simply applied the same methods I used to deal with Damon before, constantly pushing those poor 9-to-5 workers. For instance, young people should experience some hardship, shouldn't they? Isn't that how everyone gets through? If others can do it, why can't you? Reflect on yourself. How do you expect to get promoted and earn more if you don't work hard? Although the approach was crude and cruel, our company offered salaries 7 to 8 times the industry standard, excellent benefits, and annual overseas trips. So even with a boss like me with such a temperament, there were still plenty of elites wanting to jump ship and join us. There were even rumors that my company was like a Sandhurst for the corporate world. Those who had been through my rigorous training would never fear any difficult bosses they might encounter in the future. I picked up my coffee, glanced at my expectant girlfriends, and took a slow sip. Oh, come on, no need to be so polite. Tonight, our company happens to be negotiating a contract with another firm. Why don't you all come along and watch? This matter should be nearly settled by now, with only the signing of documents remaining. There shouldn't be any issues. That's why I felt confident enough to bring them along to show off. The girls immediately erupted in a chorus of excited cheers. Amid the commotion, we all drove together towards the company building. I led this boisterous group, heading towards the meeting room while calling the subordinate in charge of this matter. I thought everything was in order. But unexpectedly, before I could speak, the person in charge's voice trembled. "Boss, we've just received notice that the investor behind this deal is unsatisfied with many details and wants to come in person." What? I've never dealt with this company before. It's a tech firm established in the north just a few years ago. Recently, it was acquired by a mysterious investor. This investor is quite enigmatic, rarely appearing in public. But there's some gossip going around. They say the investor's life took a sudden turn a couple of years ago. He was about to get married, but at the moment of proposal, his love interest suddenly abandoned him. Since then, he's become cold-hearted and ruthless, difficult to approach. I gripped my phone tightly, furrowing my brow. The contract amount for this project isn't particularly large. It's only about a few $100,000. Is it really necessary to involve this big shot personally? The manager's voice continued to come through the phone. They say the profit split won't work, they want to renegotiate. Also about the proposal, design, planning, post-production costs and profits. The more I listened, the more irritated I became. Soon, I was striding towards the conference room door. Then I pushed it open forcefully. I started cursing. Bloody hell, is there no end to this? The deal we offered you is already the best, and you're still not satisfied? We've already agreed on everything up front, and now you're changing it. Do you think you can push us around? Even if we're the supplier, we don't have to take this rubbish. If you want to do it, fine. If not, forget it. I knew this wasn't our manager's fault, so I directed my anger at the other party. I didn't care about some big shot or whatever. I always ensure my partners have enough profit margin when negotiating, and I never micromanage. So there's never a shortage of businesses wanting to work with me. If this one doesn't work out, there's always the next. I glared fiercely at the other party. Clenching my fist, I was about to slam it on the table. Suddenly, someone grabbed my hand from behind. He moved to my side, slowly uncurling my fingers. He leaned in close. His voice sounded right by my ear. "Don't hit the table, you'll hurt your hand. Hit me instead. Just like before, wouldn't that make you feel better?" I turned my face stiffly. It was Damon Howard. Someone called out, "Boss?" So, he was the investor. It had been 2 years. Damon was wearing a suit, looking much the same as before. He appeared polished and put together. His hand was still tightly gripping mine. His gaze was intense, as if possessed by some obsessive, manic emotion and desire. "Finally," he said. "I've been looking for you for so long, Ruby." Everyone's eyes turned towards us. Not just the people from the partnering team nearby, but also the group of girlfriends I had brought along. They were all craning their necks, eyes gleaming with curiosity, whispering amongst themselves. "What's going on? Who's that guy? I think he's some kind of investor." "Have you heard of him? Could it be Damon Howard?" one of them exclaimed. "My dad mentioned him before and showed me a magazine interview. Said he managed to climb back up even after going bankrupt. Unlike me who just keeps squandering the family fortune, I might as well go dumpster diving." There were too many voices gossiping. Meanwhile, Damon was still holding my hand, calling me Ruby over and over. It was driving me mad. I slapped him across the face. "What are you calling me? I'm not Ruby Finch, don't you understand? I'm a fake, a fake, a fake. You have a real fiancé, so can you please stop looking for me? Those 2 years were all just to fool you. Yes, it's all fake. But who knows? For a fleeting moment, I wished I was truly Ruby Finch, someone who could rightfully stay by his side. But I'm just a task doer summoned by the system, a greedy, vain, and petty villainess. So, Damon Howard, why are you looking for me? You have your destined love. Please, don't look at me like that anymore. Don't stir up my memories of those 2 years. Otherwise, I might believe that even a scoundrel like me, who only wanted to con money, might have truly fallen in love with you, as if the act became real." I closed my eyes. took a deep breath, then forcefully shook off his hand. Turning, I ran down the stairs. This time. Damon, please don't come after me. Bloody hell. After I ran downstairs, I realized I had come here in my friend's car today. My own car was parked somewhere else. There wasn't enough time to call a driver either. However, a few minutes later, a Rolls-Royce pulled up beside me. The window slowly rolled down, revealing Damon's somewhat anxious face. He opened the door and grabbed my arm, his voice trembling and a bit incoherent. Yet he called out my name from my original world. Nina. I've been looking for you ever since you left. I know you're not Ruby Finch, and I know you have a new identity now. But what does that matter? Those 2 years we spent together weren't fake, were they? Why did you have to leave? His eyes were red, as if he was holding back tears. I averted my gaze to the side and paused for a moment. Suddenly, a twinge of sympathy welled up inside me. What about the real Ruby Finch? I asked. Damon. She's the one who was engaged to you, after all. The real Ruby Finch? Damon was stunned for a moment. He seemed a bit confused as to why I would mention such a person. After pondering for a while, he finally seemed to understand. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the car. Ruby Finch, is it? All right. Let's go see her. The car drove straight to the train station. He held my hand tightly without letting go for a moment and bought a ticket to a nearby coastal city. The train would depart in half an hour and arrive in 2 to 3 hours. As evening approached, Damon and I found ourselves standing in another city. The feeling was so strange. For a moment, I couldn't quite process it. Meanwhile, Damon had already taken out his phone and called his assistant. Have you contacted Ruby Finch? Send me her address. Also, please inform her and her husband that we'll be visiting them shortly. Husband? Ruby Finch is married? Yes, I was completely stunned as Damon and I sat in Ruby's spacious and bright living room. Her husband was tall and straight, wearing a white shirt, and seemed to have a gentle personality. He was asking the housekeeper to prepare dinner while making tea for us. I blinked. In the end, I couldn't help but call Ruby to the garden. Scratching my nose, I began somewhat awkwardly. I'm sorry, Ruby. I used your identity for 2 years. If it wasn't for me, would you have possibly? Would it be possible that the ending of the story wouldn't have deviated so much? Ruby scratched the tip of her nose. Her reaction was the same as Damon's. They both seemed confused by what I said. After a moment, she shook her head and smiled. It's all right. Actually, I should thank you for helping me meet my current husband. Seeing my confusion, she took my hand directly. She began to recall past events. Do you know, when I first found Damon Howard, he had a terrible temper and insisted I was a fraud. At that time, he was busy looking for you while developing his company and planning revenge on those who had framed him before. He was run off his feet every day. I wasn't interested in him either. I only came to him because I only knew of the Howard family in the big city, so I wanted to rely on them for support. But seeing his depressed, fish-like face suffering every day, I thought it was better to stay away from this person. So I simply told him I didn't want to go through with the engagement. I just didn't expect that right after saying those words, I'd meet my current husband as soon as I left. He was waiting at the bottom of Howard Tower with flowers, saying he was Damon's business partner. From the moment he saw me, he wanted to get to know me. Ruby gently rubbed my cheek. She hugged me softly. Her gentle voice reached my ears. So, don't feel guilty about using my identity. If I had really ended up with Damon by some twist of fate because of that ridiculous ancestral engagement, we wouldn't have been happy either. The ones who should truly be together for life are those who love and like each other. Nina, I'm already with the person I'm meant to be with. What about you? What about me? Ruby had just finished speaking. Suddenly, Damon ran out of the room. He probably thought we had been chatting outside for too long, as his face showed an anxious and flustered expression. Only when he spotted me did he seem to relax a bit. Then he strode over and yanked me out of Ruby's arms. She seemed startled by him and frowned. What are you doing? It's only been a short while. Afraid I'll steal her away? Damon's face turned slightly red. But he still didn't let go of my waist. He tugged at his lips, ignoring Ruby, and shoved the phone into my hand. Here. It's been ringing nonstop. Someone must be looking for you. I glanced at him. Taking the phone, I saw there were indeed dozens of messages on the screen. But they were all from the group chat with my drama-loving friends. Because Damon had appeared midway and I had inexplicably run off. They were now in an uproar. What's going on? Does Nina have a thing with him? Aw, my gossip-loving heart. Someone satisfy my curiosity. Why did that Howard guy run off too? It's so late, why haven't we heard anything from them? I bet we won't hear anything tonight. Nina must have been seduced by his good looks and is now. They must have gotten back together, right? What nonsense. My face flushed red and pink as I read. Angrily, I shoved the phone into Damon's arms. Then, remembering it was my phone, I snatched it back. Damon was much taller than me. He lowered his head and saw the contents on the phone screen. He rubbed the tip of his nose. Nina. Shall we get back together? Ruby's husband also came out of the villa. He put his arm around Ruby's shoulders, and they both looked at me and Damon with gentle smiles. I felt a bit embarrassed. I pinched his waist and muttered quietly, "Save it for when we get home." He didn't say anything more. But it was too late to catch the train home, and it would be rushed. Ruby originally wanted me and Damon to stay overnight, but I felt it was too much trouble for them. So we booked a hotel for the night nearby. When Damon walked me to my hotel room, he stood at the door. He seemed to have something on his mind. After hesitating for a moment, he brought up the topic from earlier that afternoon again. Nina. When I said I wanted to start over with you, I meant it. I knew he had come all this way to find me, so we couldn't keep avoiding this issue. So I became serious too. I leaned against the doorframe, looking at him. But what about the practical issues, Damon? Your company is in the north, and I'm doing very well in the south now. I won't consider moving to another city. He quickly interrupted me, shaking his head firmly. No, Nina, you never need to accommodate me. I'll adapt to you. I'm already starting to move our business center this way. Soon, in a year at most, I'll be able to be based in your city permanently. I was stunned for a moment. As far as I knew. Except for Damon's grandfather who left his hometown to go to the countryside, the Howard family had never changed their city of residence. I bit my lip. Then suddenly remembered something else. Then why were you so picky about this contract? We've already given you the absolute best deal, but you're still unsatisfied with this and that. Damon suddenly became anxious, the tips of his ears turning slightly red. Before I could finish, he hurriedly interrupted me. It's not like that, Nina. I just wanted to find an excuse to see you. Your side's representative said you wouldn't show up, so I came up with this bad idea to get you to come out. Please forgive me. Forget about this project, I'd give you all of Howard Corporation's profits if I could. That statement reminded me of 2 years ago. Back then, Damon put all his income in my hands, letting me do whatever I wanted with it. His expression now was still as serious as before. His gaze locked onto mine. He took his hand out of his pocket and held it out in front of me. In his palm was a red velvet box. The ring I couldn't give you last time. Nina. Are you willing to accept it now? The afternoon sunlight from that day seemed to travel through 2 years of time, shining on me once again. I gently grasped the box. This time I was no longer pretending to be Ruby for that task. This time, I would give the real me and Damon a chance. Let's give it a try.